This is a RodCast dedicated to the farmers in Clinton County who asked me a question when I was caretaker of the Miami Cemetery from 2000 to 2003. They asked me how it was that Lebanon Citizens National Bank and legendary bank owner uh, George Hinkle was able to go through and purchase up farmlands on the not yet built 71 planograms. So I did some investigative research, and here's what I found. Again, Clinton County farmers outraged at why their parents lost their farmland along I-71 when they were offered a little over market value for the land by Lebanon Citizens National Bank representative in Lebanon, Ohio, George Hinkle. He and Corwin Nixon and Dusty Rhodes were all friends, and I'm sure George Hinkle and John McMahon were friends as well, who was on the board of the Miami Cemetery. The maps came out in Columbus and were given to then Governor Dusty Rhodes. And the information, from what I understand, leaked down probably through Corwin Nixon to Lebanon, Ohio, and Lebanon Citizens National Bank founder George Hinkle. And when he found out they were putting in these highways, he knew that there was going to be gas stations built. And he went and talked to the people who developed Marathon's MRO Marketing. They were the founders of MRO Marketing, who owned the pit stop out there on the Lebanon exit of I-71. If you get off on I-71 there at 68, you'll see the pit stop Marathon. I can't think of a lot of people out there. I know that Danielle Morgan works across the street there at the pilot at the Cinnabon, or at least she did. And Jolene Phelps worked as a cashier out there at the pit stop Marathon there on, I believe it's 68 or 63 coming out of Lebanon. So obviously they were the first gas station on 71, so it would call into question Marathon's Vice President Seminarelli and some of his other investments as he went through making sure that Marathon was represented well through Speedway and other subsidiaries on this new exchange in Ohio back in 1960. The farmers were offered the money for the land, and they took it. And that's the end of it, unless you wanted to look at it through the eyes of Martha Stewart and exchanged stocks, Martha Stewart did, and went to prison for it for insider trading, because the purchaser of the stocks, and think of it as commodities trading, has to be a politician. And the founders of MRO Marketing, to my knowledge, are not politicians. So I don't know about some of the land down through there. There's an article attached, or you can look it up. Parky Scott owns a gigantic farm out there, one of the largest hog farmers around back in the 80s. And so as we take a look even closer for these Clinton County farmers out there, we look at some of the businesses that were put up along 71, but I think that we can pretty much rest our case right there at Marathon because of the amount of real estate that they covered, the amount of money that was exchanged in what you would call Standard Oil and BP back when they had the buyout from Howard Hughes that involved British Petroleum coming over and buying from Howard Hughes, the Standard Oil companies, and then Marathon going through and purchasing up the Starvin Marvins. They bought up the Super Americas, the racetracks, and so on. And so when you take a look at the movements of all that money and what may have been the developing relationship, you can't help but to stand here in 2024, a good 80 years later, and start to ask the question of whether or not Senator Steve Wilson is the beneficiary of some of these relationships that were built underneath the American farmer out here on I-71. And as Democrats, I think it's heavily needed to have these answers. If you want to get away from the Trump vote in the horticulture and farming communities, we're going to have to address situations out there like the distrust that may remain for the banker because of what happened with the farmers Dusty Rhodes and George Hinkle from Lebanon Citizens National Bank. As we get these messages in from Lebanon residents, just like George Hinkle, Steve Wilson, we may want to use people out there to do this work for us, and people like Greg Landsman, to go ask the tough questions and to find out if there was some apologies needed for some farmers out there. We take a look at 71 and everything it brought to the state, and we're not trying to say it shouldn't have been built. We're just saying that a lot of times, if bankers know stuff from politicians, it can cause our finance committees and our finance laws to get a little estranged, and we don't want that in America. We want a transparent account of monies, especially when it comes to places like government-run institutions, cemeteries, and banks. Moving forward, if you will, there were some issues there at Miami Cemetery that were brought up to me by these farmers about the banking and the real estate investing and stuff like that, which brought a bad light on things. And then there was a revelation made to me by a friend of the farmers, not only in Clinton County, but in Warren County too, who ran that cemetery for quite a number of years, and then went down and got a 5-year retirement from the Warren County Probation Department through what could be considered some of his connections, like Judge Dallas Powers, who probably referred him down there, him and Ray Gray from the License Bureau. Charlie told me that not only did that happen, but he also told me that there was an instance where a black man was murdered. He said he wasn't really sure what the cause was. He told me about it while I was digging James Tietmeyer's grave. His daughter works out there at Ardell Trucking. And he was very apparent about how close I was digging to it by the way that he acted. And before he left, he said, we don't ever want to dig that up because, of the problems it would bring, obviously, to us since it was an organized effort to cover it up by people around here involved with the cemetery who may or may not still have connections at the court, Warren County Dispatch, and the mayor's office. We don't know. But we do know that there's a large family down here, and they control a lot of the decisions that are made, and that's why Charlie said it. Charlie was a politician. Like I said, he's a Warren County probation officer. And he told me that this man was murdered at the corner of Franklin and Main Street, Waynesville, Ohio. He was getting his car worked on, and he said later on that night they brought the poor man's body over here and buried him in secret. And I told him that across the street from my house, there's a place called the Victorian Place. There's a lot of people over there. I know the Peths lived over over there and may have developed the land over there. The owners came up from Texas, probably somewhere around Abilene, and there was a blue, powder blue, almost like my shirt, Toyota. It was the earliest one I'd ever seen. It was early 60s. I posted pictures of it. I've sent it to Columbus Missing Persons, FBI. I've sent it to On the Road with Steve Harvey and Dateline. But the minute I mentioned that car being abandoned over there, it was mum's the word. Charlie looked at me and he said, "You're kidding me." And then he laughed. And I don't know what they did with that car. If I had to guess, I'd say they took it salvage down in Oregonia, or possibly took it out to Dayton Xenia junkyard. And I'm sure anybody that was around it would remember it because it was in, good condition for an abandoned car of over 20 years at that time. And who knows, they may have, found something in there that could identify the man and get his family some much needed closure. Charlie did say he was in the Columbus area, and he stopped because he was having car trouble. So he may have been headed to Wilmington. He may have been taking 42 and stopped off there at the old Red Carnes gas station everybody can remember. There was only 3 gas stations here in town. Charlie owned the Shell down on Main Street by the Village Restaurant. Weasel Miller owned the BP down there at the end, near 73. And then if you come on up towards the Waynesville Retirement Community on Main Street, right before you get to Church Street, you'll see the gas station there where the man was getting his car worked on. The car was abandoned up on the Anthony Wayne Trail. If you go all the way up Church Street and Park, and you go down that tree line there, it's probably about 10 feet over into the walkway. You'll end up in the Victorian Place. And once you do, you walk straight across down Dewberry. You'll end up at a place 444 Dewberry. And it's about halfway between there and the 425 Somerset water line, which sits right at the end of the road on Somerset. So it's between Dewberry and Somerset. There was a gigantic tile. I want to say it was about 48 inches in diameter. The road went over it, and then down by the tile, just below the little bridge there, it's not very big, it's just where that tile was, set that blue Toyota. And that was back in, I'd say the last time I seen it was around 87 or 88. And they started developing, of course, for the Victorian Place. But I think with those clues provided, we can get some answers and bring a family in Columbus some much needed relief to let them know, yes, we did know about this down here. We had a hard time getting things started as far as the investigation goes. But we finally did find your grandpa. We finally did find your father. We finally did find your son. We finally did find your brother in God's eyes. And we did lay him to rest in the cemetery. And this is where he is. And like I said, it's probably the walkway right there in Section A by James Tietmeyer.